Boy and Dog, Part 14. They've escaped from the land of happiness and are back in the world. As they struggle forward, Motion looks skyward and whispers, "Thank you, light and dark." Spark looks up too and says, "Yes, thank you, my friends." They move on. Then Spark and Chipper stand on a hilltop, waving to their friends who are out of sight below, and Spark calls, "Goodbye, my friends. Bye. Bye. Thank you. I'll remember you forever." Then Spark and Chipper turn and suddenly drop into nothingness. Spark plunges down into a sluggishly moving stream of a thick brownish-red substance, a goo, then sinks out of sight. An instant later his head pops up, his mouth open wide, gasping for breath. He is covered up to his neck with the goo. He calls out in a panic, "Chip!" Chipper hops up and down on the surface of the slowly moving material, frantic. Spark sees with relief that Chipper hasn't sunk into the goo, and he says, "Chip, you're safe." As the goo continues to ooze forward, pulling Spark along, he tries to raise his arms. Each strained effort, however, encounters a kind of suction. Fear chokes Spark's throat. "What is this?" Chipper barks with apprehension. Spark stares hard at Chipper, then lowers his eyes, becomes still. Chipper yips anxiously. Spark says, "Shh, Chip." Spark slowly opens his eyes. He sees Chipper's devotion with fresh sight and says, "I was so mean to you." The goo slowly slips down to Spark's chest, and a forked tree branch drifts under his arms, cradling him. Chipper hops beside Spark, nudging him with affection, and Spark says, "I wish certain to bring help things to Grandpa and Grandma, but I forgot. I even forgot about Papa after a while." The forked branch floats away as the brownish-red substance ebbs down to Spark's waist, leaving no trace on his upper body. He sees this and says, "Chip, look!" He tries to move his legs but barely makes any progress. And he says, "Oh, Chip, I'm so glad you aren't stuck." Chipper circles Spark, trying to encourage him, and Spark says, "I'm ashamed, certain. All the treats and things, they just don't matter." The substance slips down to knee level, leaving no sign on his upper body, and Spark says, "Look, look, it's gotten lower." Spark lifts his knees more easily. He pushes forward slowly as he says, "I turned against my friends, sure." He looks at Chipper and says, "Against you." With tiny, joyous bubbles, the substance imperceptibly sinks to Spark's mid-calf. Spark moves forward with more ease and says, "What was I thinking on?" The goo is now at his feet. Chipper leaps with joy, not seeing the swirling hole beneath him. Suddenly he drops from sight. Spark gasps, horrified at Chipper's disappearance, and calls, "Chip! Chipper!" Chipper's head pops up, panic in his eyes. Spark says, "Chipper!" Spark drops to his knees, grabs hold of him. "I've got you!" He tugs hard, but Chipper is being sucked down. Spark says, "No!" Spark strains to keep a hold. I'll get you out. Be brave, Chip." The dog is being pulled down. Spark says, "No, no!" Spark reaches deeper for a better hold, almost toppling in, and he says, "Chipper!" Chipper is wrenched from Spark's grasp, swirls, then sinks out of sight. Spark leaps up in a frenzy, screaming, "No!" Peering wide-eyed into the hole, terrified and shaking with fear. Dizzy, he throws his head back and howls, I can't! He bolts away, then immediately spins back and with eyes squeezed tight shrieks, "Can't!" and simultaneously jumps into the void. Chipper's body breaks the surface, clutched in Spark's hands with Spark following, gasping for air, pushing Chipper onto the surface. And he says, "Oh, Chip, you're safe." He tries to scramble out, but the muck squeezes through his fingers when he clutches it. He says, "I can't get a hold, Chip." Chipper hops up and down, frantic. Spark spies a branch at the bank's edge and says, "Chip, can you settle yourself into that fork of the branch?" Chipper rushes to the branch, wedges himself in, and Spark says, "Good, Chip. Now, turn your back to me and ease part way out." Chipper eagerly adjusts himself, and Spark says, "You're so good, Chip. Now, I'll reach for your tail." He catches it. "Now, squeeze back into the tree fork, Chip. Can you do that?" Chipper struggles to pull Spark's weight as he tries to get back into the forked branch. Spark says, "Oh." He makes a lunge. Look at him. Then, landing inside the forked branch, anchoring himself, allowing Spark to pull himself on land. Chipper is exhausted. They both lay exhausted. Spark reaches over and pats his friend, then slowly gets up and says, "Are you ready to start homewards?" Chipper hops up, tail wagging. Then, stunned, Spark gasps as the goose surges towards him full tilt. It bubbles joyfully, racing up his legs, then plummets to his feet again. Astonished, Spark looks down and makes a decision and says, "Ho, I'm not going to stay stuck." He grabs Chipper, does a deep knee bend, and leaps up with all his might. Simultaneously, the swirling substance rejoices and boils with great power around Spark's feet, then lifts him with a dynamic, exhilarated explosion of force, thrusting him and Chipper skyward. Spark and Chipper streak over the star-filled vista. Then, early morning, and they land on the hilltop near Grandpa and Grandma's cabin. Spark caresses the grass and flowers, savoring their fragrance as if for the first time, and says, "Whew, Chip, come on. We're close to home, certain." He gets up and they dash homeward. Grandpa is sewing shoes at the table in front of their cabin. Spark and Chipper bound into sight. Chipper barks and runs ahead as Spark rushes to Grandpa and says, "Grandpa!" Grandpa says, "Ah, grandson, so you've come home." Grandpa holds Spark at arm's length and says, "But what's this? You look in need of—" Grandma appears at the doorway and says, "Did I hear Chipper?" She sees Spark and rushes to him and says, "Spark!" Spark hugs her fiercely and he says, "It's so fine seeing you, Grandma." Grandma says, "Running off like that. What was you thinking?" "Well, let me see ya." Skinny and pale looking, sure. You come in and have you some proper food and rest prompt." Spark says, "Certain, Grandma." Grandpa says, "He'll be in presently, my dear. We'll just have a word, Grandma turns towards the cabin as she cautions Grandpa, "Don't you be keeping him long now." Grandma goes into the cabin, and Grandpa says, "Your Grandma was right. You are pale. You gave us quite a turn, grandson, leaving as you did." Spark says, "I was tugged at, Grandpa. Tugged real hard to go." Chipper runs to the well and barks. Spark looks at Grandpa. "I'd best see to Chip, Grandpa nods in agreement. They walk to the well. Grandpa says, "So you found the place of your dreams?" Spark says, "Yes." Grandpa says, and was it what you'd wished for? Spark says, no, certain. Grandpa says, And your papa? I saw him, says Spark. That's so? Grandpa asks. He didn't want to come home to us, Grandpa. Well now, Grandpa says, remember you said Papa used to rock me when I was little? Grandpa nods. He loved us, sure, didn't he, Grandpa? But no more, huh? Grandpa says, your papa can only, and then old Nell whinnies and stamps her feet. Spark turns, oh, Nell! Spark nods and looks at Grandpa, and then hurries to the corral where he and old Nell greet each other. Spark looks back at Grandpa. Oh, Grandpa, isn't there a special place of happiness with treasures and all, anywhere, then? Grandpa says, oh, yes. Grandpa joins Spark. But where, then? Grandpa answers, a humorous glint in his eye. Maybe in a direction you've yet to look. Spark says, but where, Grandpa, where? Grandpa smiles, knowing Spark won't like the answer. Could be where you're standing, for a start. Spark sighs and says, oh, Grandpa. But he can't help but smile. It's Grandpa's usual confusing way of talking. At the cabin doorway, Grandma is and calls to Spark, Spark, you coming in? Spark turns towards the cabin. Coming, Grandma. Grandpa says, let's see what your grandma's got waiting for you. Spark says, I'm hungry, certain. They walk towards the cabin. Grandpa says, and you'll tell us about your papa and the adventures you've had? Oh, yes. But, Grandpa, in that land, there were some good people, slaves. I didn't help them to escape with us. Grandpa says, lad, each one of us must. Grandpa calls, Spark, eats is ready, past ready. Spark says, coming, Grandma. I'm hungry, sure. When they reach the door, Grandpa goes inside, but Spark pauses and looks back at Chipper. Chip, you coming? Chipper rises on his hind legs and gaily chants, sorrow and joy together in boy, sorrow and joy make a strong boy. Spark says, you silly dog, you'll never change, certain. Grandma yells, Spark, Spark, good eats is waitin'. Spark says, coming, Grandma. He and Chipper go through the door, closing it behind them. Then the door slowly opens again. Spark sticks his head out and looks up at the sky and says, such a big world. I could... Grandma calls, Spark? Spark says, coming, Grandma. Chipper noses his way between Spark and the door, sniffing the air. Spark takes one last look skyward, then goes inside.